Hello. Hi, Benny. Let me just see if I can see how this works. We're just getting used to this platform, so do bear with me. I'm wondering if I can let you in. Right, it should be letting you in now. Can you hear me okay? If you can't, I can hear you, but I haven't got. Aha! There you are. Great stuff. How's it going?
Not bad. How about you?
Yeah, I'm all right, my friend. Thank you. Just seeing how this is going. So I've only used this particular bit of software for delivering webinars where we don't have camera from your end. There's just interaction in the chat, and I'd completely forgotten how to work out how to do it. So apologies for working that out with you.
That's all right. Am I your first course participant?
Not the first course participant. We've had lots of people through it, but for some reason, people haven't managed to find their way to the clinics yet. I think we're just not telling people about it in the right way.
Yeah.
So we're in the midst of changing how all of that looks so that people can kind of, I think, it's much more supposed to be a general kind of drop-in session for people to come in and discuss their ideas and go through any kind of things that they might have struggled with or need some extra detail from the course. So it's when we were doing the live courses, there was a question and answer session at the end, which could really add some value to that. So it's partially that, partially a chance to just kind of talk through anything that you might need to be talking about, really.
Yeah, I guess for me, because this is meant to be during my work hours, but if I know that I want to book it off, I can do. But I guess
Right.
knowing before signing up for the course when these slots are, or whether there's
Yeah.
flexibility might be useful for people.
What we're going to do is we're just going to, rather than kind of doing it as you get one slot per unit, we're just going to give you 6 months of access to them, and they'll be every 2 weeks at this time, for this time period, and you can drop in. You don't need to be there for the beginning of it. You can just drop in for the last 20 minutes, or however that works. So we'll tweak it to fit what works best. The whole point of this is it's supposed to give people a chance to talk about stuff, and the more people that join it, the more value that will give, because there'll be interesting questions from different sides.
Yeah, definitely.
So but it's all brand new, trying to adjust to the pandemic thing and how we can teach people and help people at the same time as learning all sorts of weird bits of software. I'm the builder, I'm the building geek, so I'm normally out there hitting things with other things to make them happen. So it's been quite a steep learning curve to kind of go from like, well, I can notionally teach this on a building site. How do you do it at a desk?
Yeah, and I work for a community energy group, and we're teaching. So it's like Community Energy Scotland, so it's a community energy support organisation. So
Cool.
I'm running a workshop with people who work for community energy groups about the energy system, and we had to move all that online. So yeah, we've been struggling with all the same things.
Teething. Yeah, there's so many different options. It's like, do you go for something simple like a big Zoom thing, or do you try to use something proprietary like this? Is this overcomplicated? Like, what are the barriers to entry for people, technologically speaking? It's it's a bit of a minefield. We kind of need the reason we're using this is because we do the live webinar stuff, and it's really good for being able to present things and do polls and all that kind of stuff at the same time. So we were already paying for it, so we were like, oh well, let's just run the clinic through there. Yeah, it'll do. Anyway, how are you progressing? Which bits of the course have you done so far?
So I've done the planning and the building regs.
Right.
I've read through most of the building regs things. There's a few of the kind of add-ins at the end that I haven't looked at yet, but I'm about 2/3 of the way through those.
Okay, and how are you finding it? Is it answering the questions or like giving you any insight? Are you finding it useful? We need to know.
The planning one, I found that I think I knew most of what was in that module already.
Right.
And the site that I'm working on or
Hmm.
want to work on is attached to a grade 2 listed building. So I
Right.
was hoping to hear stuff about listed buildings, which I don't think fitted in there. So
No, not particularly. Mostly because a lot of these things tend to be rabbit holes that get
yeah,
very specific, like site specific, quite quickly.
yeah,
So yeah, I think that's the sort of thing that we definitely expect to speak about more in this kind of a session.
yeah,
And it's the sort of thing where you can kind of pose me a question and then I can feedback later on if I don't know it off the top of my head. Yeah. So is it are you considering adjoining, like abutting the property, like building it onto it, or is it just a case of it's right next to it site wise?
So it is officially what I'm building will be listed as well,
Right.
but because it's part of the same property. But
Right.
it's a
Okay.
big old house. The oldest parts of it were built in the 1700s,
Right.
um, and the latest parts of it are pretty much what I'm working with, which were built in the 1960s and have kind of breeze block and steel girder.
Yeah.
So what? Yeah, so the part that I'm planning on working on will be knocked to the ground and rebuild, and it's seen as having no historical value,
Yeah.
but it's still covered by listed building regs and
Mm.
will need to be. The development is meant to be in keeping with the older parts of the building somehow.
Right. Okay. So yeah, normally what they want to see is they want to see it in keeping with, so it doesn't. They either, generally speaking, they want to see one of two things. They want to see that it looks like it was always there, that is part of the original building, or they want to see that it is significantly architecturally distinct,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can tell that it's not from the same time.
Mm-hmm.
That very much depends on the local planning committee and the type of the building as well, and where it is, and is it in a conservation area as well, or is it just the building?
Cotswolds.
Right. Yeah, it might do. Sometimes each town will have different sections of it, which may well be like preserved, like have a conservation banding on it to say this is the oldest part of the town. We want everything to look like this. So I'm in Lancaster, and we have the castle, and then we've got the surrounding area. The footprint, the kind of curtilage of that castle, is a conservation area. So everything within that kind of almost like a postcode, everything within that area is conservation, not necessarily listed, although some parts of it are as well. So it's generally town specific. And that changes things as well. So the listed building thing is one thing, being in a conservation area is a different thing. But
So
we can.
I think it's within the Cotswolds designated area of natural beauty or something along those lines,
Right.
but
Okay.
that's quite a large area. It's not.
Yeah.
It's on the edge of the town, kind of outside of town in the countryside, so it won't be part of any local town-specific area.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if there's been buildings there before, the worst case scenario is they're going to want it to look similar to the thing that was already there. Um,
Mm.
yeah, which isn't necessarily ideal, but it does mean that there's that you're going to get permission one way or another. There just might need to be some compromises along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So the building regs, that I find that really interesting. I guess it's probably an area where I had less knowledge before, so
sure.
I had more to learn from the course.
Okay.
And I had a few specific questions that I'd noted down
Yeah,
to ask you.
go for it.
So the first one, what I'm planning is a main building
Hmm.
and then essentially a storage, well, essentially a shed, a storage area attached to, which is abutting the main building, but not internally linked.
Okay.
So the whole site is along. It's a kind of along a strip, along a historic wall, which can't be really changed.
Yeah.
And the building comes up next to the historic wall, and then I'm proposing putting in a lean-to basically along the side of that historic wall, and that being a kind of storage workshop area.
Right. Got you.
Um, the the square meterage of that storage space is
Hmm.
20 meters squared. Sorry, no,
Yep.
it's under 20 meters squared. It will be closer to 10, really.
All right. Okay.
Um, so Potentially, I'd hope that it wouldn't come under building regs. Certainly, I would
Yeah.
plan to insulate it to the level that the house would be required, and kind of, there's already concrete hard standing, so I was hoping I could put a relatively lightweight timber construction on top of the existing standing without building things to heavy high specs.
Sure.
Do you think
that sounds sensible? Yeah, I mean, the bit that they're interested in is the habitable domestic area. So you'd get planning permission for the whole unit at once, so that you don't want planners coming around and saying, you've just got permission for this, what's this happening here, even though it's technically permitted development and blah blah blah.
I don't think permitted development applies on a listed building, unfortunately.
No. So you'd want to, so the planning permission wise, you'd need to do the whole thing. But yeah, regs would only be applicable to the main structure, as far as I'm aware. Now, whether there's a kind of a quirk because of the listed building thing, I don't know. I can't imagine there would, because they're separate things. The listed thing is much more to do with the planning side of things, and then certain standards that you have to maintain. It's more, the building regs when it comes to listed buildings is much more about restricting what happens rather than enforcing a specific path through it. So it's if you've got an existing listed building, to say you still have to upgrade it to a certain amount, but you can't damage or change the fabric in X, Y, and Z ways, which limits what you're allowed to do. So you have to keep the original windows, but you could put secondary glazing in or something like that. So that's normally how
there's already permission to knock down the breeze block structure to the ground and build up from that. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a problem. So yeah, I'd say that you'd be able to limit the engineering requirement just to the domestic element and not have to worry about the other bit.
That would be really useful, because I've got a yurt that I made, which I can live in for the summer while I start off. But once it starts getting to winter, I'll probably want something which doesn't leak and is a bit more solid. So if I could have built the shed and informally move into that while building the rest, and not waiting for building regs, that would be very useful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it makes sense to have some kind of storage / workshop / temporary habitation space that you don't have to kind of worry about or get approved or anything like that. As long as you make it look like you say you're going to make it look like in the planning, it should be fine. I mean, we always recommend that you build to regs, whatever it is, so that you've got you can push forward, at the end of your use of the building, then there's more flexibility for that. But it does mean that you just don't need to pay for an engineer to specify details, and you don't have to go overboard with certain elements. So if you need to stop short on the insulation, fine, you can do. And it means you can just make sure that you've got simple jointing and all of those kind of things. So it's definitely a good idea to kind of keep them separate.
I think in particular, for example, if I don't want to break the slab, there's 8 to 10 inch depth concrete slab.
Right.
I could either just build on top of or break and rebuild.
Yeah.
If I was building to regs, I'd need an insulated floor.
And
that would probably, it would either involve breaking that slab and rebuilding something with insulation, or raising something a foot up or so.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing about pre-existing, do you have the specifications for that slab, like the original drawings or documentation of how it's made?
I drilled through it to find out it was 8 to 10 inches, but that's that's all I've got.
So for the shed bit, yes, that's very sensible and shouldn't be a problem. I can't anticipate there being any problem. For the main house, you'd have to have it surveyed by an engineer, which may end up costing more than it's worth doing. In order, it might be better to just kind of cut a section off and dig it up and then put your piers in or whatever it is that you're using for the rest of the house. It's one of those things where from an environmental perspective, it's insanity, and you've got this thing that's definitely going to be more than good enough. crack on, you know. But from insurance, warranties, all of those kind of perspectives, they'll want to do some quite significant like core sampling to check what it is. Now, I don't know how much that costs. It's definitely something that's worth looking at doing, but it would certainly be worth preparing yourself for the fact that you might not be able to use it for the house, or it might not be economically viable on a pure cost basis, you know.
But yeah.
Environmentally, if you can keep it. But
yeah. So just while we're on the last point, so the shed doesn't need building regs. Is there anything I'll need to do to kind of prove that or get certification that that's the case before I just whack on with building it if I have permission?
No, shouldn't need to. No, it's small enough. Yeah, generally speaking, it's when it gets over like 30 something square meters that they start getting interested and want it to be up to regs. So if you're well underneath that amount of floor space, then you shouldn't have any kind of an issue whatsoever. Yeah, they're not bothered. It's literally the only people who are going to check is going to be planning, and they're just interested in what it looks like. Does it look like the plans? Is it where you said it was going to be? Yeah.
Cool.
Shouldn't make a difference.
So I guess related to what we've been talking through already, so I'm in a situation where the building will be knocked to the ground.
Yeah.
I'll have, for one whole wall, I'll have existing foundations that I could build off. We've dug an exploratory pit. They seem deep enough.
Yeah.
And sound enough to be built off those existing foundations.
Cool.
The other wall, I have the historic wall. Which could be built off if it can bear the weight, but that would need to be verified by an engineer.
Yeah.
Already a development there's another a family on the other side who are also doing a self-build, who have had that wall surveyed by an engineer and are planning on extending the height of it slightly, and that's been okay. Right. The engineer hasn't written the report back yet, and that seems to be taking about a year.
Oh God. So, yeah.
I don't have any maths on it or any stats about what it can bear.
Right.
So, and then there's obviously the width of the building is going to be 6.6 meters out from that wall.
Yeah.
And those two gables won't be on existing foundations.
Yeah.
So it seems like I've got a choice between, well, I could build the house in many different ways. One of the fundamental choices is whether I build a new wall along the historic wall, in front of the historic wall, or whether I rest the weight on the historic wall. And one of the other key choices that needs to be made is whether the structure is blockwork or timber frame, post and beam. Assuming timber frame, but that might depend on, I guess, the results of some of these surveys and what seems most possible.
Yeah, I mean, there's no problem with having a kind of a hybrid system. If you've got some foundations that exist that are signed off by an engineer to be able to bear the weight, that you could basically, I think probably the simplest way to be looking at designing the building would definitely be the timber frame element. That's certainly what we'd recommend. If you had block on site from demolishing, if it was sensitive demolishing that you could reuse, then it would certainly be worth reusing some of that material for creating piers or plinths or padstones where you can, to kind of bring everything up to the right level. You could do free draining foundations for the rest, like pier foundations to carry posts for the rest of it, and maybe just run like a wall plate along the existing wall that you could then bear the weight off. There's no reason why you couldn't kind of do that utilizing the existing infrastructure to do that. That's just a case of getting an engineer to sign off on, yes, you can use this bit, and then designing the rest of it to fit. But yeah, it doesn't present a problem in that respect.
Yeah. So I guess in the you had a kind of a flow diagram showing the process of going from planning to building regs.
Yeah,
Uh, it described a bit of a back and forth, um, but going from drawing to final design, architect detailed drawing, engineers calculations.
yeah.
So I guess that the decision process that I was talking through there, that's quite, yeah, that'll be a key element of this.
Yeah, I'd say that there's definitely some. So you wouldn't get the calculations, all of the calculations done first. So I'd say that because it's not a virgin site, you need to kind of weigh up the options that the site presents. Which and it's the same with a kind of refurb project as well. Is that you kind of have to see what the existing building is and how it's behaving, and which bits are worth keeping and which bits aren't. So in that sense, you would need to do some of that engineering work earlier than normal.
Yeah,
That
I was
process diagram doesn't carry that. So generally speaking, yes, you don't do your engineering calcs until you've done planning. There's no point spending that money until you know you can build the thing. Whereas in this case, in order to put an effective design together, you need to know a couple of bits of information first, which are, can we use this wall? If so, do we mimic that around the site so that it's uniform, or do we put piers in the rest of the place, or do we just get rid of all of it and do a virgin installation? So yeah, information gathering is required on that one. What you should be able to get a kind of in principle idea from that, rather than having to go through all of the calculations that are required to do that. There would be a case of like, yes, this wall will behave in this way. Therefore, we can then use these known quantity solutions to go along with that solution. At which point you can go, okay, based on that, we're going to have a suspended structure that's going to use these supports. Now we'll do the planning permission. After which you then go back to those points and specify exactly what they are after planning.
Yeah, so it would be about asking an engineer for an informal opinion about whether it's likely to be possible.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Yeah, you get to start with the information about the wall and what they predict it can bear weight wise, and whether you can use it in that way. And then if so, then it's just a case of pairing it with appropriate support for the rest of the site. Which is, there's lots of different things to choose from. A certain amount of that informed then by your intentions for the rest of the house.
What do you think about a 6.6 meter span? It's quite wide.
Yeah, you'd need interim support, so you wouldn't have that span. You'd break it down into thirds probably, so 2 to 3 meter spans maximum. I'd probably do it in kind of break it into thirds, and have two supports in the middle to carry it. So you can do any span you want. You're just going to have to pay a lot of money for some, cross-laminated timber, or some insane, doubled up oak beams or steel or something like that. So the more conventional the sizing, the spacing you can do between your supports, the more the cheaper the timber is that you can get to use, because you could get like a 8x2 joist and double that up, and you'd be able to use that over probably over like a 4 meter span, but so a 2 meter would be really easy to do.
Yeah, so that affects the design of the internal room, because especially if you're having two supports, then that means potentially two pillars going through the middle of a number of rooms.
Not necessarily, because you can what you can do is you can build like a supporting grid as your base plan that allows for posts to be put on top of that in different places. So certain supports would need to be through supports that go to the pier, but some of the interim supports wouldn't need to be. So you're not tied to where the piers are to define your wall spacing or placing. There is a little bit of latitude there that you can do it. Some would be through and through. Some could be placed upon your supporting structure.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of that is definitely stuff to talk about, depending on the kind of the method that you want to use. It's picking one timber dimension and then designing everything based on a repetition of that room size wise can be a really good way to go. But like I say, you're not tied to it. There is some flexibility. It just has a consequence in terms of offcuts, wastage, where you can reuse that, things like that.
I heard that if you use the kind of the timber I-beams with the ones that are kind of OCB style.
Yeah, like the Psycho ones. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like OSB with a bat and top and bottom sort of thing.
Yeah. So those can do kind of 4 to 6 meter spans.
Yeah, you can do amazing. There's incredible stuff you can do with them, and they're pretty easy to fabricate on site as well, which can save a huge amount of money.
So that's almost 6.6 meters, but I'm not sure it quite is.
Yeah, again, it comes down to speaking to an engineer, and then it's kind of working out, okay, well, what's worth doing? Even if it could span that amount, it's probably worth putting a support in for the foundation layer. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to repeat that for further up. So if you wanted a bigger space, a bigger span, a bigger internal space without any break, then you could utilize that, because there's a difference between bearing the house and bearing the roof. So the spans are different, and what you can achieve with that timber system. But there's a lot of flexibility there. The sort of sizes that you're talking about are well within what's reasonable to achieve.
Cool.
Yeah, they're really good.
I think that was most of my questions at this point.
Cool.
Yeah. You mentioned in the course private inspectors and then the local authority inspector. I'm interested. What would you tend to use? Do you have a preference for one or the other?
I've used both quite a lot. The approved inspectors tend to be a little bit quicker to attend, a little bit more flexible when it comes to that, because there's usually more of them, because it's not dependent on the council being run effectively. So the council departments would have had 10 people in them, have probably only got 2 in them now. So they're really stretched, which means that they can't necessarily attend at a drop of a hat. It means that they might not spend a lot of time with you. They might be quite difficult in that they might just not have the time. So it'll be binary decisions. Is it right or is it not right? Rather than, is it nearly right? It'll be fine. Approved inspectors will, be there probably a bit more often. They're pretty competitive price-wise, so it doesn't make a lot of difference there. We use the company called Approved Inspectors, who have got offices around the country. They've always been really good for us so far. But the last 2 projects that we did used local building control, and they were great. They were fine. Well, one of them was in Scotland, which is the building warrant system, which is a bit different. But you have to do much more in-depth application before you do anything. So they really sign off on the detail before you've even started. So the inspections are kind of more of a formality to check that you've done what you said you're going to do. There is obviously still an element of that with with English building control stuff, but the building warrant is definitely a little bit more detailed. But both of those were fine. So I don't have a particular allegiance. I suppose it would depend on where your closest office is.
Yeah.
So what's your local town?
It's next to Bradford Navan, which is near Bath and Trowbridge.
Yeah.
Local bigger places.
See where your nearest one is. Where are they? Maybe not. These guys have got an office in Shropshire, one in Staffordshire.
Is this approved inspectors?
Yeah, I'm not sure they'd be any good, but there'll be another one. That's just a company that I've worked with for 10+ years, so I know that they're good. There'll be other ones. Yeah, I don't have an allegiance. Generally speaking, we tend to go from work from recommendation on everything that we can do. So if you know anybody who's done a building project, especially if it's a little bit quirky, then speak to them and see what their experience was. Approved inspectors tend to be a little bit better with weird and wonderful construction techniques and natural materials, just because we can spend the time kind of educating them. Whereas building control, they've either come across it or not. But it's more and more a case that people have come across this or different types of buildings, so they're less afeared of it than they were 10 years ago when they just kind of wouldn't engage with it at all. But now it's much more of a known quantity, so it's much better.
Yeah, and I've heard some people talking about different ways, and I don't know whether this was just a misunderstanding of mine, that the level of sign-off you do in advance can vary. You can have things signed off, very detailed designs signed off in advance, and then you just build to those.
Yeah.
Or you can have a lot of the reg sign-off being kind of like phrased as, to the satisfaction of the builder or to the satisfaction of the inspector. And then the sign-off is much more about site inspections.
So it's kind of a mixture of all three. So there's kind of a couple of things going on. So the size of the project and the type of the project makes a difference. So you do something called a building notice, which is where you say, I've started doing the building work, come and check it's okay. And that's usually for refurbishment work, like you're putting new windows in, maybe you're taking a wall out and putting a steel in, something like that. Usually uncomplicated.
But yeah, with full build projects.
With full build project, you always have to do an application where you put that in advance, and you need as much detail as possible. You may need to do revisions as you go. So what they'd normally do is what they should be doing is they should check through it all and check the engineering and make sure it makes sense and look at it and go, hang on a minute, you've said that you're going to have a 6-meter span here, but you've only got a 2x2 supporting it. That will never work. Put something proper in, and then you redesign it and send it back to them, and they go, that's better. So they should be checking it. That's basically what they're doing. They're auditing your engineering and your design to check that it meets their expectations. And then the site visit will be checking specifically that you've done what you've said you're going to do, which is why they need to see the different stages. They want to check that you've put the level of insulation in that you want. And this has historically been because builders were crafty bastards and wouldn't do the right work. They'd say that we put this in, but they would just not put it in. They'd put insulation around a door so that when you look in the cavity you can see it, but not in the rest of the house to save $2,000. And that still happens, which is why the inspections are there. So obviously self-builders tend to be the ones that they love because everybody's doing it properly. They want to do it right. They want to do it as best they can, and they want to do it as efficiently as they can. So it's more a case of what they're checking for there is a lack of experience that they want to make sure it happens. So, but yeah, certain critical things, they want to see big structural things, they want to see the insulation, they want to see fire protection measures, things like that. But it's just due diligence, really. But yeah, they will want all of the detail up front is the nub of that question.
Yeah. Right. One last question then. Sorry.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yep. So in the design that I've currently got, I'm trying to work out where my service pipes will go. We'll come into all this stuff. And it's hard. Yeah, it's hard to put everything all in the same place.
Yes.
Likely going to end up with a kitchen sink not right next to the toilet, where the sewage pipe comes in.
Yeah.
Which will then, to get the water out from the kitchen sink to the foul drain, we'll need to go under the floor at least for the hallway, and then I assume probably up again to reach the height of the sewage pipe. Would that be a problem, or would that require me burying the whole sewage pipe at a lower level?
Yeah, ideally you want your main output to be the lowest point, and that everything else goes into there, and you work out how to design the services so that they work in that way. Now, there is always a solution for it, but it tends to be a weak point that could potentially cause problems. So if you're going to have to go uphill at any point to create that connection, then you're going to need a pump, which means you need a macerator to grind the waste down into uniform tiny amounts that the pump can handle, which then means you've got this electrical thing that you rely upon in order for part of your plumbing to work, which isn't ideal. So but creating something that has got the least problems, so the fewest bends, the straightest runs, the widest bore, all of those things, so that it can just leave and become somebody else's problem as soon as possible, is the ideal. And if that means you have to chop out part of your existing foundation to make that work, then that is worth doing, because it's 100 years of needing to work out where that horrible smell's coming from because something's not quite right. Yeah, definitely. It's kind of, think about the levels, work out if there's a way you can artificially raise the structure, the whole structure in some way. It might be worth doing, like if that, depending on if you've got height restrictions for planning or to tie it in line with existing buildings, then maybe you can't do that. But if you can't raise it up in order to give yourself that headroom, then you will need to dig out in order to provide that connection.
Okay. Yeah.
Unfortunately. I mean, you can risk the pump and the macerator, but I definitely say it's like last resort.
Yeah. And what height for a toilet? What height does the inlet to a toilet sit above the floor level?
Toilet, the inlet, like the cold water in.
Oh, sorry, the sewage out.
The sewage out is about, what's that about? To the center of it, it's about 350 mil, I think, to the center of it. I wonder if there's a dimension here. Good old screw fix. Well, this guy says 160 mil.
160 mil to the center. How wide's the pipe?
And they are so there's a lot. Oh, apparently, toilets differ so much with all the foreign imports these days. Says Naughty Boy on the Screwfix forum. He says between 160 and 205, but they're around 180. Is that the center? That's to the center of it. Okay.
Well, I think we'll have to explore that in more detail with mapping out all the services.
Yeah, kind of working out what your heights are. I mean, is there a possibility to build it off the ground a bit to give you like a suspended floor?
Yeah.
Service void, is that something that would work dimensionally with the site?
Well, I mean, I guess it comes back to that question of, am I building off the slab or am I digging up the slab because I've got to make new foundation?
Yeah.
But I'm going to need to raise it at least slightly up to get insulation.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have said, if you're allowed to keep the slab, I'd have said use the slab as, if you can point load off it, to build the structure to give yourself that, because you're going to have to, like I said, you're going to have to do insulation and things anyway. Yeah. So if you're not restricted to your ridge height of how high up you can build the building, then giving yourself like an easy run of it in terms of isolating the rest of the house from that slab, because that concrete is terrible thermal mass. Really bad for damp water ingress. It just sucks it up. It's really bad as a dew point for attracting a condensation point on the outside of the insulation. So there's various things. So if you can isolate the house from the get-go by building it off a little bit, by using piers or posts to raise it up, then you can kind of treat the whole thermal envelope of the house as a distinct new thing that you can control much better, and that also gives you a service void underneath and solves those problems.
Yeah, I am.
So it could be good, but it depends on what restrictions are. Whether you've got the height to play with or not, or whether that turns it into a problematic thing for the planning because all of the other houses start at the slab. So
yeah, well, I guess I'll have to try and explore that.
yeah.
Then I'd need, because of Part M, I imagine I'd need to have significant access ramps into the house if I raise it high up.
Yeah, that is the problem, isn't it? There's always consequences. Yeah. I mean, quite often what we do is we kind of raise the ground level around the house to kind of meet that when required. But yeah, or you have to have some kind of like nice slow ramp that meets those regs.
Yeah.
It is tricky. But you know, there are ways and means. If if it's a case of using the slab, then you can obviously do like a free draining insulative layer, like using the foam glass would be great in that instance, because it doesn't matter what the slab is doing. You don't need any membranes or anything like that, because any water that's in that is going to go down away anyway. It's going to the pressure is going to push it outwards, not bring it inwards. So there aren't really any issues there. The only issue would be that you'd need to isolate any timber from the concrete. So it would be better to create some pads using preferably some of the concrete block from the original building to build up from the base, which you then sit the rest of your timber on, so that it's not sitting directly on the concrete.
Yeah, and if I put foam glass on a totally flat surface, then it wouldn't necessarily drain away. It might puddle in some places, I guess.
It could puddle, but you could always put some channels in. There's different ways that you could kind of mitigate that. I wouldn't expect if you've got enough water in the structure to puddle, then you've got a bigger problem somewhere else. There's water getting in, so I wouldn't worry about that too much. If there's water, if the water table in the local area rises to a point where it's going to penetrate upwards through the concrete, which is very difficult for it to do without quite a lot of ground pressure, it will at some point just equalize and go away again. So it shouldn't be a problem. It can't go any further up. Once it gets up through the concrete, it can't go up through the foam glass. There's no capillary action, nothing. It's completely free draining, so it just wouldn't be a consideration. It would be completely fine.
Cool. Well, thank you for giving so much time. I think having no one else on this call means I get a lot of stuff.
I know, it's great. That's what they're here for, though. This is what, like, we'll lap them up while you've got the chance. It's great. It's really good. I mean, I'm trapped behind my desk trying to come up with ways to help people, and people are slowly coming into my world, and I get to help them. But this is like a busman's holiday. It's great. I get to kind of not talk to myself, do something real world for a little bit, which is really, really good. Yep. But yeah, I think, are you going to speak to Arif then later this week?
Yeah, I think on Friday, he said.
Cool. Well, see how that feels. But yeah, I think we've got another one of these in a couple of weeks. Don't worry if you can't make them. Like I said, we're extending that thing to just be like a 6 months chunk that you're going to be able to drop in whenever you need to. So I'm sure you'll get spammed with some emails telling you about how wonderful the new way of doing things is. So yeah, save your questions up, and I'll be happy to answer them. And maybe we'll even have somebody else.
You in advance about when I'm going to join and when I'm not.
It's useful if you can register, yeah, because if nobody's registered on it, I get on with other stuff, and I'm homeschooling my boy here at the moment as well, so I'm kind of all over the place. So it is really useful to know. If you register and then can't make it, I'm not going to throw my toys out of the pram. But if you think you are going to come in, then yeah, please do register. It does help. And
is that following? Do I just follow the same link I followed last time and click on a different session?
I think so. I think it should. Do you know what? I don't know. I think it maybe send after each unit. It might send you a link to do it. I'll find out and I'll send you a separate email.
I think we're going to change the system. Hello. Change the system to probably just have it as one thing, and then just have the link out there and be a little bit less automated with it. But we're kind of working out how to do that at the moment, because we only made the decision the last couple of days. So a much more technical person than either of us is going to make that decision. But don't worry, Benny, we'll keep you informed, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Good. All right. Well, yeah, keep finding cool questions for me to answer. I like it.
I'm sure I will.
Nice one, Benny. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks.
Cheers, mate. Bye.